Everybody, we have another difficult topic today, the Charleston murders and their reaction of the people, the victims or the victims' relatives. And so we have a video to start with, to start off the discussion, give a little bit of background. And then I also found another, an NPR clip, which I can run a little bit later, that gives a little bit different of a perspective. But first, let's watch what happened, what the news reports were at the time. No, I didn't see it.
With a special series, Finding Forgiveness, and we're hoping to shine a light on people who have triumphed over tragedy with an incredible spirit that will really inspire you.
Back in 2015, 12 people were shot during a Bible study at the Emanuel AME Church in Charleston, South Carolina. Only 3 of them survived, and just 2 days later, many of the families somehow found it in their hearts to forgive the shooter.
A lot of us were trying to figure out how that could be, and for most of us, forgiveness would not come easy. So how did those families who lost so much find that power, the power of forgiveness? I headed to Charleston to meet with 3 extraordinary women. 3 women whose lives are intertwined by fate and faith and their sheer amazing grace.
Police and emergency responders are on the scene at what police confirm is a shooting inside a church in downtown Charleston. That church is known as Mother Emanuel.
Felicia Sanders' beloved Aunt Susie was killed that day. So was her 26-year-old son, Tawanza, who had a lifetime of promise ahead of him. He worked 2 jobs and was a gifted poet. Polly Shepard survived that day as shots rang out, words from the shooter she will never forget. I'm going to leave you to tell the story. Jennifer Pinckney's husband, the Reverend Clementa Pinckney, was also among the 9 killed that tragic day 3 years ago.
We were his girls, and we're going to be right here for each other.
I caught up with these 3 incredible women at the Second Presbyterian Church, 1 block from the crime scene. I feel like I'm around strength. I don't know about you, but that's what it feels like. Do you feel strong?
Some days you can conquer the world, and other days you just want to hurry up, go away.
Today, their voices are being heard, preaching about the power and purpose of forgiveness. I don't know if you guys know this, but I don't consider you victims. I consider you teachers. 3 people who could teach us something. We watched you go through pain. We watched you on your knees. We watched you hug your community. And then we watched something that I feel like is a miracle.
We have to forgive.
Just 2 days after losing their loved ones, family members said they forgave the shooter.
And I forgive you.
But may God have mercy on you.
How hard were those words?
It wasn't hard at all. I had some other things to say to go with it, but someone behind me started crying. What people don't know is that there was a silence in that room. It felt so serene in that room. There was a calmness in that room. Me and Miss Polly watched my son take his last breath. But for me to be kneeling right over him and looking at how beautiful he was, and he seemed like he was at peace.
Polly describes a light in the room that seemed almost spiritual.
And there was a light in that room. It's almost like the lights was off, but they weren't. Remember?
Yes.
It was like we were in a twilight. There was 2 different lights in that room. He had a laser on that gun. That was one of the lights. But the other light was, it was a quiet. It was like you were in a different world. Yeah.
She says she felt God's presence.
I have no doubt that he was in that room with us.
With all that loss, you still know he was in the room with you.
I know God was in that room, yeah.
I know that we're all people, and you feel the same pain, and you feel the same hope. So, Polly, for you, the idea, I would think that you'd be livid, angry, want revenge, want to just take the guy by the throat, you know?
I was that way at first. But then I thought about Felicia. Felicia had lost her son. And I said, if she could forgive, why are you so hard-hearted you can't forgive? So from that day on, I had a release. Because forgiveness is like, you think you're letting somebody else off the hook, but you're actually letting yourself off the hook. Because if you keep it, there's no healing with hatred. You have to love each other. That's our second commandment.
You have to love each other.
Yes.
Jennifer, forgiveness doesn't come easy.
No, it doesn't.
When someone robs you of your husband, which is just what that man did, where are you on your journey?
You know, you always want to forgive, and that's what we're taught. You know, sometimes I feel like I teeter-totter, but then I know that it's the right thing to do is to forgive. You know, it's what we've taught our girls. I don't teach them to hate.
Have you forgiven him?
To a certain extent, yes.
But not all the way.
Sometimes when I look at my girls and what they've, you know, they won't have the father-daughter dance. They won't have daddy to walk them down the aisle. I think about them and their future and what they're missing out.
Felicia Sanders says it hasn't been easy for her granddaughter, whom she saved by laying over her body during the attack.
I grieve for my granddaughter. I really grieve for her. No 11-year-old child should be in combat. So I have to be strong for her.
Yes, you do.
Yeah.
And I understand that wholeheartedly because I have to.
Yes.
You got to be strong, you know.
Don't you get tired sometimes of always being strong? Do you ever get tired?
All the time.
Yes.
All the time.
And it tells you in Matthew 6, right after our Father's prayer, you have to forgive others for you to be forgiven.
I would say from us forgiving, we can go on, we can wear a smile, we can smile.
The families and the victims were honored by President Obama, who spoke at Pinckney's funeral.
What a life Clementa Pinckney lived.
When I saw President Barack Obama give the eulogy for your husband, I have to say, when he started singing,
Amazing Grace.
Amazing grace.
Amazing Grace.
How sweet the sound
That save a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see.
My goodness.
Wow, weren't they something?
My goodness.
Yeah.
I covered Senator Pinckney years ago and managed to spend some time with his wife shortly after the shooting, and it sounds like she's come a bit of a ways, but not quite where the two other women are.
I think they all say forgiveness is a process. Like you can forgive on Monday and still be angry on Friday, but you wake up every morning and forgive a little.
It's like, I don't know if I'll hear Amazing Grace the same way, because that is Amazing Grace.
That was powerful.
They're personifying Amazing Grace.
They are something.
And who knew you had such a delightful voice?
We're going to have a lot more on today.com, including a moment that really moved us. It was a gospel choir that performed Amazing Grace in that church. We're back right after this.
Okay. That was not today's show. What's your reaction? I feel like crying. Yeah, it's very powerful. Yeah, it just brings tears to my eyes.
They supported each other a lot, I think, in the process.
Yeah, did the one put your hand on the other one?
I think they put on each other.
I have a friend who's a member of the AME church here. Here? Yeah, in Zero. An amazing. And I've been to that church, and I've met a whole bunch of women from that church too, and it does not surprised me. I mean, those women are so faithful and they so live every day the front of their faith. I mean, they would be honest to say they've all experienced hardship and certainly slams, personal slams, as well as members of their family who have been taken wrongly. It's, you know, it's something to be admired, I think. I just admirable, all three of those women, that they could come that fast and probably lead the whole church community to a different place. It's amazing.
Do you think it's only because they're in a church community that they could forgive like that?
Well, they were all quoting the Bible, so I mean, you know, it's in a church community that you get that familiar with the Bible, that you can quote and bring it to mind when you need to.
Well, certainly what they were talking about, that it's about love, not hate. They teach their children that to love, not to hate. So maybe they have a step up on us.
Somehow I don't think I could. It seems almost impossible, doesn't it? Does it seem possible to you, or is that just me?
One of the faith is made them their ideals of being, and they felt the presence of the spirit.
Yeah, isn't that unusual, the light in the room, especially when the shooter was shooting.
I know.
Yeah.
So there's something that their faith has given them. Well, God gave them.
Where was God in that room?
God was there.
Hard to believe.
So I think it's possible, just to answer that, you know, when you realize what she said, that it's a process. That one day you say you're good, the next day you're very angry. So you're still in the process, and you just, for me, a lot of things are just a process. And you wonder if you'll ever get there, but I guess, you know, that's where you start.
Maybe your faith and intention, but your emotions aren't there yet.
Yeah.
And Mary?
Well, it's like, I agree, it's a process, but there's wisdom in it. And those women had to learn wisdom that perhaps sooner and more deeply than many of us have to, because of the reality of their lives in this country, which is less than whole. And the fear for their sons all the time. I've talked with a woman who actually said she had to teach her son how to drive black. And so that, but there is wisdom in it because they're mature. It takes maturity to be able to, or that is to say, one's ego has to be strong enough to not have to need to hate. That's not saying it right.
That's pretty profound, though, the way you said it.
I think you have to leave the ego out.
Yeah,
And let the spirit come in.
There's an up and a down when there's been something wrong happening. And the person who's down temporarily is the person to whom it happened. And the other is up. And as the person who is down chooses to see the perpetrator as a real human being, as well as acknowledging, yes, it was wrong, but they gain strength and they become more equal. And that is what allows forgiveness, is that you see the other for who they were, who they are, human beings like we are. But this one, who knows why? This guy, well, I guess a lot of people did find out why, but
there's probably more to it than just.
Yeah, why the guy why he did what he did.
Got radicalized the way he did.
Yeah, and so you can have pity or concern for the other. That also helps bring one up from being the down to the up, to see the other as whole, not whole, I mean.
But as a human.
As a human. But that's not easy when you're hurting.
And she also said forgiveness was for yourself, not
Yeah, that's an interesting concept too.
That's
But
a
letting
very
go.
common concept, actually.
As long as you can't forgive, you are hurting and you will say where you've been the pain. And each of us has the, it's a different capacity that we have to learn and grow with. But yeah, we're the wounded ones if we can't forgive.
And then we're re-wounding ourselves
Yeah,
every
over
time
and
we
over.
are consumed with hate.
Yeah, well, you're destroying yourself. You can't have a good life.
It gives the other person power
Mhm.
that you don't need to give to them. That
Yeah.
you can choose to cease
Yeah.
giving to them. They had power. And you can now
He doesn't have power anymore.
not let them to be the powerful.
Yeah.
And I think, you can separate what they did with the person, you can hate what they did, but you can still love the person. Does that make sense? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, but I can't absorb it.
Yeah, I believe that because of their hardships, they've had to learn to do that so they don't stay down.
Oh.
I mean, when you think about the stuff they have to go through day by day, it doesn't mean it works for everybody, all of them, but that's where they try to be. I mean, just reading books all the time, you see that they have more grace than I could, because I've never had to deal with all those hardships of how they're treated all the time.
That's right, day after day.
They're, you think
But it's especially cruel and unjust that people who've gone through those hardships every day after day are now then the victims of something even worse. It's just very personal.
because they know, well, because it's normal in their lives, right? And they have to be able to survive by saying that we are good people. Just because somebody else doesn't think we are. Right? Doesn't mean it isn't hard for them, no.
Yeah, no.
Definitely doesn't mean it isn't hard for them.
It's like having your husband is taken from you, but I won't let you take my peace of mind. I choose to keep it. Or I choose not to hate. You can't make me hate because of what you did. It's again, it's a leveling. I choose to not be like the other person, for instance, in a sense. I choose to be different. That's very hard. Depending on how wounded you were and how much you lost. How bereft you are, maybe one of those people lost somebody that was the only income maker in the house.
I think a good example that I got is Christ even dying and those disciples being able to say, we're going to take that tragedy and we're going to still go forward with what Christ wanted to do. And I think that's a statement of, we might get the forgiveness. It doesn't mean we're going to forget, but we are affirming love instead of hate. I had a great example with a neighbor raised in a Jewish family, and they had a family reunion in Los Angeles. These 8 kids and her family and all these other grandkids. Her parents were killed by a drunk driver that took 4 people, uncles and aunts and father and mother here. And she came back after that event. They all were there afterwards to grieve, but she came back for 3 months and she was just so full of hate. And she was in prison. She used the term, I feel like I'm locked up like that drunk driver that killed my parents. How she responded was to fly to LA and meet this fellow in jail who was grieving in his acts of what had happened. So, the healing can happen on both sides of a tragedy,
Sometimes, not.
No, I'm not saying it all the time, but it can happen.
Yes.
And so that was a very profound witness to somebody that came back and has lived very hopeful life going forward now.
I was thinking about the folks in South Africa. They had the advantage of being able to communicate with the ones who've done the wrong and those who were wronged,
Oh, yeah.
which is where you can hope for reconciliation.
Yeah.
A fair amount of the time, that's not possible. So the forgiveness part has to be entirely on the part of the person who was wounded. And you're right, it's not that something didn't happen. Some people think if you forgive, it means you did it wasn't bad or nothing. That's the opposite of what it is. Something happened, and yes, I choose not to.
It's interesting that I found out that the 2 days after the shooting, it was at the bail bond hearing in the courthouse with the perpetrator there that these women spoke up. So they were actually face to face with him. But in our justice system, it's not like they did in South Africa, where the women could stand up and say, look, this was my son, this was my husband. They couldn't get up and tell their story, but they were allowed just a few sentences. And those were the sentences that they spoke in the courthouse face to face with him, which I think doesn't often happen.
Very seldom. Although I think isn't someone going to tell us about that, about what's going on in King County? I thought there was going to be a presentation in one of these classes about the reconciliation program that goes with the criminals who are minor felons.
Damon Meyer.
Damon is gonna, I think.
Yeah,
I'm hoping
that's Damon.
Yeah,
that's Damon.
We have 2 classes on incarceration, and he will be present for both of those. So I'm not quite sure how that's gonna play out. But yes, we will be discussing that. Chris, did you say?
I would have a hard time. It would be slow process to forgive totally. But I can separate the act. I can separate the act from the human being too, because you just think, I say this all the time, nobody had this little baby and said, gee, I wonder if he'll grow up to be a murderer someday. I wonder if he'll be a drug dealer. No kid puts that on their little picture of what I want to be when I grow up. So something happened to that human being along the way that changed them. And so I can separate the human being from the act, because it's just more complicated than that. And some people are, there is evil world, but
but sometimes it comes out of, grows out of abuse or neglect or something,
or bad chemistry.
Like what they were taught, think about what parents can teach a kid.
Well, I would like to show a 6-minute audio clip, which Kelly didn't tell me about, but I found recently, which gives a slightly different take on this Charleston event, and see what you think of that. Oh, hey, Nancy, let me see you. Okay.
Good morning.
Good morning. Okay.
The day after 9 African Americans were murdered during Bible study at the Emanuel AME Church in Charleston, South Carolina.
I'm not sharing. I need to go back and make sure I'm sharing.
Family members of the victims confronted the alleged killer, Dylan Roof, at a court hearing.
I would never talk to her ever again. I would never be able to hold her again. But I forgive you.
That was the daughter of 70-year-old victim Ethel Lance. In the days that followed, the mercy demonstrated by the families set the public tone for Charleston's leaders, both black and white. But as NPR's Wade Goodwin discovered, not all leaders of the city's African-American community think forgiveness should come so easily.
At the beginning of Charleston's existence, its economy depended on West African slaves called gullah, not just because of their labor, but because of their expertise in rice farming brought from Africa. Today, their descendants and other African Americans are ensconced in every facet of Charleston life: government, the arts, the judicial system, and academia. Dr. David Rivers, Charleston native and associate professor at the Medical University of South Carolina, says that's partly why the city didn't explode in anger after the murders.
Because of our leadership, plain and simple. Leadership with the mayor, with the community, with the ministers, police chief, and everybody. The relationship showed that everybody was working together, they cared.
On a warm Wednesday evening, 41-year-old state senator and Emanuel AME pastor Clemente Pinckney was leading the Bible study when a young white stranger walked in and sat down. At Pinckney's memorial, Black Charleston demonstrated they stood for everything Dylan Roof didn't stand for. If Roof was about hate, then they were about love. AME Bishop John Bryant.
Someone should have told the young man he wanted to start a race war, but he came to the wrong place.
But if much of Black Charleston's leadership on television reacted with mature rectitude, that approach was by no means uniform.
We are the result of, and in some ways still operate like a plantation. Anger at this kind of mayhem is a normal and natural reaction. I am extremely resentful of what is going on in our community.
There are few, if any, in Charleston who can match the civil rights credentials of Millicent Brown. In 1963, at the age of 15, she was one of 10 students who desegregated Charleston's public schools. She's been fighting for the cause ever since. Brown, a retired history professor, is not thrilled with Charleston's response to the murders.
Laying all these compliments on us because we have been so loving and embracing, I think it's disingenuous at its best. I understand the stages of grief, and you don't usually jump to forgiveness first.
Brown believes the community's muted anger is a result of generations of Charleston's black leadership being overly concerned with what whites think of them.
I think our reaction, whether we know it or not, is in many ways a reflection of our need to be accepted, to prove that we are better than y'all think we are, and that we are not like Ferguson because we are more forgiving.
On a Sunday afternoon at Mall Park on the east side of Charleston, Black Lives Matter organizer Muhyiddin Dabaha is organizing a protest march.
All right, you can hear the sound of my voice. Try to pull up a little bit. This is a chant.
Dabaha has organized this protest primarily through the internet. Unlike most of Charleston's black leaders, Dabaha is under 40, and so are his followers.
It's attracting individuals that are ready for something different, something that's a little bit more radical, a little bit more grassroots and less camera.
But community organizing does not come easy. While everyone in the park is young, angry, and motivated, there are just 80 of them. Nothing like the thousands that would heed the call of Charleston's leading black pastors.
The fact is that you're not a leader unless you have a following of people. And I think that we are going through some soul searching ourselves and understanding what leadership looks like within a crisis like this.
So it starts off with, it is our duty to fight for our freedom. It's a call and response, so just say it right back. It is our duty to fight for our freedom.
It is our duty to fight for our freedom.
It is our duty to win.
It is our duty to win.
Last week, South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley proposed moving the Confederate flag off the state capitol grounds. It had been a bitter issue 15 years ago when South Carolina's black community fought and lost. Then as now, conservatives fervently argued the flag represented white pride, not black oppression.
If they had done the right thing 15 years ago, in 2000, when we moved the flag from atop the dome, we told you from the get-go it was offensive. It should not have taken my friend Clemente Pinckney to die, but it did. And it's an insult.
If there's one African American leader in Charleston that all sides appear to respect, it's Reverend Nelson Rivers, pastor of Charity Missionary Baptist Church in North Charleston. He rests comfortably in both camps.
You cannot be the thing you hate. You cannot become the evil that you seek to eradicate. Forgiveness is not the same as ignoring the facts. We want justice.
Rivers says moving the flag is not enough.
The Medicaid expansion has to happen. We cannot continue to have schemes and plans that diminish full participation in the democracy. We have to have this conversation about the economic achievement and empowerment of whole communities that are left out.
The question is, have the murders at Emanuel AME Church created new political space for South Carolina's black leadership? Or, after the last shovel of dirt is thrown, will it all quietly return to the way it's always been? Wade Goodwin, NPR News.
And now, more from
Okay, stop sharing. Well, what do you think of that?
Because they can both live together, that's the also of what they're saying, they both make sense. You still have to fight for justice, you still have to fight for Black Lives Matter. Because our lives don't matter until theirs do. I mean, it all goes together, and they're all, also, they do believe that, you know, that they can't be like the haters. Because that doesn't solve anything either. Even Palestine and Israel could use a little of that. Yeah.
Well, another part of the process, the community hasn't gone through the whole process, so there's still going to be those anger camps, for sure. And, you know, I could, in that talk, I could think of a good thing about having the anger is we still need gun control. You know, this is a different issue. You know, that cannot go away. You know, that happens in so many places, and if we were to just, you know, go, oh, it's okay, and just move forward too fast, we might forget those pieces that cause larger, bigger problems, which is guns. Another big topic.
So the anger can still exist, even though you forgive the things.
I think so.
Or the activism, what I think what they're saying is
Yeah.
turn it anger into activism.
Yes.
And try to get some things done.
Yes.
It's kind of interesting perspective on the 15 years it took to get that Confederate flag off, but
they had to be
they
active.
did take it off.
They had to be active. It doesn't mean they have to be, hey, they can have the anger. They should have anger. Should have both. I mean, I think the one woman said it seemed disingenuous, but you know, you gotta start somewhere in the process, right? And I think that people have to be active and they have to tell their stories. You know,
It's interesting to hear the criticism that the blacks are always wanting to be accepted by the whites. And we're not Ferguson, we're better than that, but I just would never have thought of that.
yeah, but I mean, there's some truth to that. I mean, there's truth in everything that has been said today. You just have to balance it out. But we still need to know, we're responsible for not paying attention to what's happening to these people because we're white. So, I mean, that white boy was taught something else, wasn't he? That they were evil. And he didn't know anything else.
What she said about the community as a whole, I think was actually demeaning to the community.
No. It
But
was.
I don't think it was respectful.
She's in the community, but it was
not
for her own.
respectful of the wisdom and the strength of the people who are just choosing to be, you know, their whole life isn't trying to be white. For one thing, they've learned that doesn't work in this unbalanced country. But that sounded demeaning to me.
But sometimes things that sound demeaning might have some good points to it too. You know what I mean? She has she has some of her own wisdom, so I think you have to learn from everybody.
And the sad thing we've learned also is we can't be complacent about anything. Just because that flag got taken down doesn't mean a new community's gonna have that and bring it back. So I mean, it's something that until hearts are totally changed, that you're always gonna be fighting the same battles. For a lot of things, we've seen what's happened with Roe, and we've seen what's happened, anyway, everything's a little fragile until it gets,
Yeah. It's true, could go back again.
I don't think women will lose the vote again, but I don't know. I just don't know. I mean, I said, I don't think women will lose the vote again, but you never know. You just never know.
I know, the way things are going backwards right now, on a lot of stuff. It is kind of interesting.
Billy has some.
Yeah, so as a Charleston native, this story is really important to me, and all sides of this story are important to me, because it doesn't take very much for me to say I'm from Charleston, South Carolina, before folks kind of put their guard up, right? Because this is devastatingly not uncommon, and I feel like a lot of my hope as we've been putting this theme together this fall, as we've been having these conversations in worship and here and coffee hour, is that we can learn how to hear one another, right? Like we all said, all points that were in the first video and in the audio that are completely valid. And to be able to hear one another and find a way forward can only happen when we share our truth and when we care about someone else's truth. And only then do I think the work of reconciliation can come. And I think Bill pointed out that's a process that never really ends. We're going to have to keep paying attention. We're going to have to keep our stories and other people's stories prioritized. Absolutely. And it can be overwhelming because there's so many stories and so many atrocities in our world as we start to name all the things that we worry about in the middle of the night. But I do think I found hope in this in the way that people came together in this 15-year fight to take the Confederate flag, literally flying on top of the Capitol right beneath the American flag. This was 2015, not even 10 years ago, which seems absurd in contexts like ours, but is not in that particular culture, and American culture, some might say. So I just wanted to chime in as someone who grew up not very far from this church, and as someone who grew up in the same school system as the shooter. And what are the ways in which we can choose to do something different with the same information? What are ways that we can highlight certain stories and truths that aren't being upheld in the same way? I don't have a lot of answers, as you can tell, but I do think this is different. And that more excellent way of love that's talked about in 1 Corinthians 12 and 13, I think stories like this really help us to consider the things, I think Dory said beautifully, that just literally seem impossible to us. I don't know if I could look at someone who killed my family and forgive them 2.5 days after they were murdered. But the fact that someone else can gives me just a little bit of hope. And that we can continue to share those stories and validate the anger and different approaches to how we might change this, so that ultimately we might get to that place of understanding a different level of reconciliation. That's just my really piece back here. The Charleston thing.
Gosh, I don't know why, we should listen to Charleston person.
And that's fair also.
It brings me to my mind what happened to the Amish people.
Yes.
Which was very similar in the forgiveness that occurred so rapidly.
I remember being shocked at the time they forgave so quickly after their relatives were killed.
And it wasn't 100% in the community. It was some who did, who I guess was the leadership, but not everyone did. And I think it has to do with one's maturity and wisdom to be able to do it. It doesn't come from a place of need, it comes from a place of strength.
You know, the Amish was a child that was killed.
Yeah.
Okay, gotcha. Lots is going on, they're just leaving the after. Service for future prepared. Nancy?
Well, I was thinking about how every single one of us has, when we get up in the morning, do this when we go to bed at night too, but when we get up in the mornings, we have the opportunity to choose. And I was thinking about, you know, the Barbara Kingsolver that we listened to earlier in the week. Dory, you were there, and she talked about this kind of anger, this angst and anguish in her community, and that people were resilient from Appalachia area, and that they could choose to take the way they're portrayed or treated or whatever by their community, by outside of their community, and succumb to like an illness of that, or they could use that to propel them to choose different ways and choose to use it to propel them towards hope. And I know in a situation like this, you know, it's really easy to say, where is the hope? But really the hope is in the voice of the woman who helped to desegregate those schools when she was 15 years old. And I know we don't like some of the things she was saying maybe, but she kept going and doing things every day that had a significant impact on her community.
Over decades.
Yeah.
And she had already been doing that for decades before she said.
I don't know that, I think wisdom's part of it, you know, and so their leader, wisdom is part of it, but each one of us can just reside in the fact that God is with us, and we can choose every day how we walk through our lives and what we allow to deter us, and you know, and then, you know, just
Lois.
Yes.
Kind of along the lines of choosing, I was really struck by the pastor who said, you cannot be the thing you hate. You know, because I do have issues with forgiveness.
Well, you're the only one.
Yeah, I always say it's my Scottish heritage, you know, like terriers, they hold on to the but kind of from I just liked that quote, because even though in my heart I'm struggling with forgiveness, do I want to become someone filled with hate? You know, because that shooter was filled with hate. You know, do I want to become that person who's enraged? And the answer would be no. And so the only path may be forgiveness, and maybe people who have really, like the Amish, like these old Baptist church, who really thought about forgiveness and had opportunity to practice forgiveness all their lives, instantly realize that they don't want to be the person, they don't want to be the thing. They don't want to be, they don't want to be moved by rage or hatred. I really appreciate that.
Well, and on the news, I was listening to someone who was, I think, more of a peace activist with the Israel Hamas issue. And he was saying, okay, and I think he was Jewish, and he was saying, so we're really angry. And we had all this horrible thing, so we had 1,000 people killed. So now we're gonna go kill 3,000 people. And what's gonna happen? Those people are gonna hate us even more than they hated us before this. And how it's just so, it doesn't solve the problem. How it doesn't solve and we just go immediately to rage, I guess. That is our immediate and retribution and
revenge.
It's revenge. Yeah. And it's just really hard, even though I get that you don't want it to continue, you know, but
it just is really hard.
It was. Rage comes from fear.
Yeah.
Which is the emotion we are least willing to acknowledge. We have the fewest words for fear. We have many more words to express happiness and sadness and anger, but the words we have for fear are just a few. We don't talk about it. It is not something I want to own. You know, and yet it is behind the guy who shot in the Charleston church. It's behind everything that's happening from us in Israel. There's fear. And the fear leads to anger, and the anger is out of control. The anger has been fueled, there's been fueled to this fire of anger. And when more than one person is angry about the same thing, they talk each other up.
Yeah.
Social media.
Yeah.
That was discussed there with NPR's clip. I think when you look at how quickly this younger generation can get information or fuel on this fear or anger. And I just look at our generation, for many of us, we've had the privilege of being raised in love and learn about things in scripture and what are we able to combat with, I think would be an answer. What small step can we do here at Newport from a small step to get a younger ear listening to these senses of hope that we see that might become something that we could look at, that we can learn from this.
When you come up with the answer, will you leave the ACE class?
I've got to even tell you, I'm part of it. I think I could leave after that statement.
It's time to go.
Yes, enjoy your coffee.
So I mean, we only have 3 more minutes, but can you think of a time in your life when you just absolutely did not want to forgive somebody? And you did?
Well.
And give us some insights into how you deal with it.
Well, it took years to forgive. And there's still stuff I don't forgive. Of how I was treated as a child. And it's the whole reason I led that class on forgiveness. I was trying to help myself get to a place to do that. But it all depends on what you're talking about. Now, if it's the guy who just cut me off on the road, I don't know whether I'm going to forgive him or not. It makes me angry.
The guy who cut you off on the road?
Yeah, on the way here. So it depends on what we're talking about. Mostly though, the worst things that have happened, I have learned to live with, which means I guess I've learned to forgive.
And let go. Anyway. Let go of it sometimes. More often than not.
I'm not focusing on it. It doesn't take any of my energy anymore.
Not consuming you.
Yeah, so I assume that's forgiveness. That could be called forgiveness because it is. I'm not allowing them to control my life. I'm not giving them my thoughts or feelings or emotions. And I did for a time because it was so painful. And it can't go away. It's always going to be there, but it doesn't control it. So I assume that's forgiveness.
And it takes years and decades.
It can take a long time.
Jack?
I've been thinking more about the effectiveness of forgiveness on the perpetrator. In this situation, obviously it's a smattering of people probably that were known to be forgiving, but what effect would that have on the perpetrator?
We don't know, do we?
Some
But it
people
might.
have reached that point. Well, knowing the person, they can't really know what that would be, but I think it would have an effect.
What would be interesting is to know who wounded the perpetrator.
Yes, that's what Chris
To
was
make
talking
it
about.
be
He
the
was
person-
wounded somewhere along the way.
And substantially to have that much hatred.
Lois.
Along those lines, I cheated and I'm still forgiven something that happened a few years ago, but. Because I was raised a Presbyterian and conceived into me, I actually forgave a young person who had really hurt me. Who was very much in my life. And I actually said, I forgive you, and I lied through my teeth. Not forgive this person at all. And I still am struggling with forgiving this person. And I don't know, but I see this person quite often. And she's comfortable around me, and she was beginning to cry. She went through a really hard period. And even then I thought, sometimes lying, this is a terrible thing to say, but I could forgive, but I didn't want to ruin the relationship, and I will never trust her again. I mean, there's a whole thing going on, but she's young, and I don't know, so I just lied.
You said that, yeah.
I just lied,
It sounds like you wanted to forgive her though.
I do want to, I'm working on forgiveness
so-
because everything, it's just holding me back.
So maybe deep down, it's not a lie, it just isn't where you are right now.
It's sort of an
You
intention.
basically gave her a gift while you get to the point where it becomes the truth.
The truth, yeah, the truth, I'm hoping it'll come true, but I'm just saying that lying works. I have to tell them, to kind of move.
Well, it's not anger,
Yeah.
It's not anger, it's not escalating.
It's not love, but it's not anger either. Well, we are getting very close to 10 o'clock. Thank you all for coming. And we've got, I think Sally is going to be leading the class next week. So that will be great to bring her back as a leader.